Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Application Performance Management in the Age of Hybrid Cloud. My name is Raleigh Gould and I will be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Julie Craig, Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates. Julie has over 20 years of experience in software engineering, IT infrastructure engineering, and enterprise management. At EMA, Julie's focus areas include DevOps, application performance and availability management, as well as ADDM. And before I hand it over to Julie, I did want to thank the sponsors of the APM Research. They are Dell, IBM, ManageEngine, and New Relic. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Julie Craig. Julie?
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you, everyone, for attending. In today's webinar, I'm going to discuss 10 key findings of my latest survey-based research on APM in the age of hybrid cloud. I've been focusing on hybrid cloud applications for several years now, primarily because they represent one of today's most significant application management challenges. The term hybrid cloud is defined differently by virtually everybody. For the purpose of this research, I use the term to describe applications that span on-premise and public cloud. These types of applications are increasingly commonplace. From the APM perspective, they create challenges with which both vendors and IT professionals are still coming to terms with. And while the breadth of the survey covered management of all types of applications, the inclusion of hybrid cloud topics is, I believe, one of the key differentiators for this particular research. So today I'm going to start with a quick overview of who we surveyed and how we selected them. I'll then present some of the key points which caught my eye as I analyzed the data. Since the findings themselves spanned almost 130 PDF pages, it's obviously impossible for me to cover all the data in today's short time frame. And hopefully throughout 2014, I'll be covering additional data points. However, as I went through this data, there were definitely some surprises for me for sure, and so hopefully the findings I am presenting today will interest you as much as they interested me. So to start out, we developed a selection process to make sure the right people were completing the survey. Application management is a specialized field, and we wanted to make sure that survey respondents were knowledgeable about this topic. So for starters, we asked them about their knowledge and responsibilities related to management of enterprise applications. Those directly involved in managing such applications went on to the next level of selection. Since so many of the nuances of APM relate to distributed integrated applications, I also wanted to select participants who understand distributed enterprise applications and not just desktop applications. Again, since terminology means different things to different people, I included examples of both. And as you can see here, more than 70% of the survey respondents actually had experience with both types of applications. We also gathered information about roles, company size, budget levels, and other characteristics which shed additional and very helpful light on the perspectives of the respondents completing the survey. You'll notice that some of the findings I present today, for example, are segmented by role and company size. Often, the data differs dramatically when broken down in this way, as you'll actually see in a few minutes. Got a little bit behind in my slide, my slide forwarding here. So I'm going to start out here with some general findings. From my perspective, hybrid cloud, as I define it, is a particularly complex enterprise management challenge. Public cloud services such as platform and software as a service can't be instrumented by their customers. So from a management perspective, they're essentially black boxes. And while a variety of primarily network-oriented tools provide visibility to public cloud interactions, few deliver visibility to subsequent cloud-to-cloud interactions, which may be part of an end-to-end transaction. So one of the first questions I set out to answer related to the number of companies which have actually deployed these types of services. As you can see, almost 40% already have, and this is interesting to me because when I did this research a couple of years ago, at that time about 33% had actually deployed these types of applications. So in general, it has grown by about 5% in the past 2 years. I also recently did research on cloud integration, and quite a number of these products are these sorts of services are going through integration technologies. So the numbers on the prior slide are particularly interesting in context to this one. To me, this slide is one of the most important of the entire survey. And one of the big surprises here is this number never seems to change that much. Survey respondents as a group reported that users are the ones who notify IT about application-related problems almost 50% of the time. Now, this is about the same percentage as I found in a 2011 survey, and also about the same percentage as I found in a survey 2 years before that. So these numbers, for some reason, just don't seem to be changing. As you can see here, monitoring centers and application management products together account for only about 35% of the notifications. So user calls are significantly ahead. The reason why I see these numbers as being so important to this research is because they show that the majority of today's companies are still having difficulty managing on-premise applications. As you'll see in a following slide, a relatively low percentage of companies actually have application management products in place. And as application components increasingly span on-premise and cloud, application management becomes increasingly difficult. From my perspective, this means that user calls are likely to increase as the hybrid cloud numbers go up, unless IT organizations can get better visibility into these services and their components. The reality is that IT's responsibility to deliver applications remains unchanged regardless of where they're hosted. Users will still call the help desk when they experience problems. So without cloud-ready management solutions, IT faces increased administrative overhead related to troubleshooting, higher costs, and reduced levels of service. And I also don't expect that unless the uptake of APM products improves, I don't see these numbers changing. So hopefully that's not the case, but it's a little bit of a pessimistic viewpoint there. This slide shows the same data we saw on the prior slide, only it's segmented by role. And this gives an entirely different perspective on this question, which I thought was extremely interesting. Directors and C-level executives believe that user calls account for only 24% of application problem notifications. Now remember, the number I showed on the prior slide was 48%, which is basically the average across all roles. However, line staff, who are presumably the best judges of the real numbers since they're in the front lines, tell us that these calls account for a whopping 61% of notifications. Clearly, the application management function is massively under-automated in many companies, since commercial application management products are one of the few factors that can make a dent in these numbers. Another takeaway from this slide is the indication that there may be a significant disconnect between the executive view of application delivery and actual reality, which I thought was interesting as well. The ubiquity of the mainframe was another surprise to me. We keep hearing about the death of the mainframe and how distributed transactions are taking over, but this study shows the opposite. Not only is the mainframe a fundamental component of distributed transactions, it's also becoming an integral part of hybrid cloud deployments. So it's a mistake to write off the mainframe when you think about the hybrid cloud, particularly if your company has a mainframe in place. And this is actually one additional consideration when you're making APM investments. So I'm always interested in knowing what keeps IT professionals up at night, and I always ask the same question in each of my surveys, sort of like the user call question that you saw previously. Back in 2008, prior to the downturn, cost was the top concern, just as it is today. However, at that time, lack of business alignment was only a single percentage point behind cost. And coming in at number 3 was lack of tools. Now today, cost is still the biggest challenge. However, numbers 2 and 3 are staff shortages and project backlogs. I believe that all 3 of these top findings are linked. To reduce costs, many companies have downsized in the past few years. And the reality of downsizing is that staff shortages occur, backlogs increase, and projects fall by the wayside. I believe that business alignment is still a concern to these companies, but it's one which is no longer top of mind as headcounts have basically been cut to the bone. One of the key value propositions of automating application management is that tools reduce the amount of hands-on time that IT has to spend on triage and root cause analysis. For example, in a related study I completed earlier this year, we found that automating complex technical processes with tools can actually double the amount of time that technical personnel have available to spend on project work. So if you're spending 10 hours a week today, automating complex processes can actually up that number potentially to 20%. Another highlight from the findings relates to use of public cloud. You'll see a couple of some red circles on this slide. The numbers that I circled actually relate to use of public cloud, and the numbers that we see here relating to software, infrastructure, and platform as a service actually look very similar to those I saw in my research 2 years ago. However, there's a big difference. At that time, the public cloud numbers applied primarily to non-production implementations, so things like pre-production applications, proofs of concept, that sort of thing. Today, approximately the same percentages apply to production use of cloud. So to me, this signals a significant shift that shows that there's a growing demand for cloud-ready APM solutions, and also a shift that it appears to me that production use of public cloud is now starting to hit early mainstream. And as this happens, as we all know, there are certain risks associated with delivering applications by public cloud, and that has implications for APM tools as well. Now, looking at these same numbers by company size, it's clear that the types of services in use vary significantly. While mid-sized companies appear to be the primary users of software and platform as a service, enterprise-sized companies appear to be using more infrastructure as a service. These findings also seem to indicate that, contrary to common belief, the use of public cloud for production is not limited primarily to smaller companies. So I see that as starting to be a shift in the market as well. So in this next section, I'm going to go over some findings related to product preferences and products currently in use. So basically, gathering the opinions of IT professionals on how they're currently managing their applications and how they see the importance of products going forward. I asked similar questions in the context of both cloud and on-premise services. My goals here were to determine the most predominant ways that companies are managing these services, and to gather their opinions on how such services should ideally be managed. So if you look at this question, I'm asking basically what the wish list products are. Now, the assumption here is that the options that respondents select are not ones which are currently in use at the respondent's company. Otherwise, they wouldn't be wish lists. So the top choices of log analysis, application management, change management, and network-related solutions actually vary only minimally from one another percentage-wise. That being said, the selection of log analysis as the top option definitely surprised me, and it's still, regardless of the fact that the percentages aren't all that different, it's definitely a testament to the perceived value proposition of such products. It's also interesting to note, however, that the perceived importance of log analysis also varied by role, as we saw with the data that I presented on the end user calls. While these types of products were the top choice for high-level executives and for middle managers, line staff chose change management products as their #1 option, and by a very significant margin. In fact, almost 40% of line staff selected change management tools as a top choice, while only 15% of middle managers and top execs did so. So we see a couple of things from this. We again see a disconnect between the perceptions of practitioners and their managers, but we also see the fact that visibility to change is highly valued for line staff, and that this is apparently a capability that they currently don't have. So for products that deliver such visibility, for example, for service modeling and topology management products, certainly there is room for growth in that space as well. So they're tussling with understanding just how applications are built, how the pieces fit, and what changed to actually create the problem that they have, just become aware of, either by user calls or by their tools. So this slide actually the next 4 slides, show management trends and product preferences for both cloud and on-premise services. I'm going to start with cloud services. And again, this was one of the big surprises for me. The number one way public cloud services are currently being managed is via homegrown solutions. So not commercial products, homegrown solutions, although again, application management platforms came in at just 1 percentage point under. So that's a common way of managing them as well. Now, the homegrown solution conversation tallies with a conversation I recently had with application management team members at a major bank. And as you know, banks have a lot of customer-facing services, and this team was actually monitoring performance of these services by running synthetic transactions and then manually correlating the responses from multiple geographies. So it's not surprising really to me to see this, but the fact remains that there is clearly a need for cloud-ready application management solutions, and also that there's a gap in the toolkits of many companies, which basically gives them little or no visibility to the performance of cloud services. And we're not even necessarily talking about hybrid cloud here. We're basically talking about standalone cloud services. Still on the topic of public cloud, I again asked kind of a wish list question in finding out respondents' opinions of the products which they view as being essential for managing cloud services. Their selection of application management platforms as the number one choice indicates that they expect cloud readiness from APM vendors. Since different vendors have varying levels of support for infrastructure, software, and platform as a service, buyers need to be very well informed and informed enough to make sure that their vendor choices match the types of cloud services they actually plan to use. Now, one thing I could say, and I'd like to say here very quickly, is, you know, when you start to look for products that are cloud ready, APM products that are cloud ready, you know, the sponsors of today's event actually sponsored this research for a reason. So there definitely are some products on the market who do have different types of capabilities in this space. So moving on to on-premise applications. Application and change management tools tie for first as the top solutions in use. However, homegrown tools are still strong contenders, even for on-premise, and log analysis tools came in at number 3. Now, if you'll notice, these percentages are relatively low. For example, it appears that less than 40% of companies in this survey, at least, currently have and use APM solutions. And to tell you the truth, that actually does tally with other research I've done on this topic. The same can be said of change management products. These relatively low adoption rates are important. They're probably one reason why users are still the application management product of choice for many companies, as we saw on an earlier slide. It's also important to remember that we're talking about on-premise applications here. Companies without a good handle on managing on-premise applications are actually going to encounter substantially greater challenges as they move on to production cloud applications and particularly hybrid cloud applications. So basically, if you're having a hard time managing your on-premise applications, wait and see what happens once they start to span across the cloud. Now, to me, this finding means increased administration costs as IT specialists spend even more time managing application services. I keep reiterating the fact that, silo-based tools aren't enough. There are a lot of touch points between the application components, and you really do today need to have application-specific tools to monitor application services today. In another indication that log analysis is on IT's radar, survey respondents as a whole see log analysis solutions as being most essential for managing on-premise. Again, however, related data indicates that this choice is being driven primarily by managers and execs versus line staff. For line staff, change management tools again were the top choice, and by a wide margin. In fact, they were selected as the tool of choice more than twice as often by line staff than by those in senior or middle management roles. So in terms of current application-related problems for on-premise applications, this slide shows that poor performance, intermittent problems, high fixed costs, and excessive troubleshooting top the list. I've discussed the impact of distributed and network-connected applications multiple times in papers and webinars throughout 2013, and performance always seems to be an ongoing issue. Likewise, intermittent problems never seem to go away. However, related research pinpoints the reasons for this selection. A significant percentage of application issues are never tracked down to their root cause, so this means that the same factors keep causing the same symptoms over and over again, and this, of course, is another argument for application management tools. Clearly, things don't get any easier when applications move to the cloud. The top issues are very similar to what we just saw on-premise. They're just in a slightly different order. What did surprise me here was the choice of high fixed costs as the #1 challenge. To me, or to many, cloud means cheap. However, this shows that this percentage is simply not the case. At the same time, intermittent problems and slow performance are still issues. Whether in the cloud or on-premise, these are symptoms of a lack of management automation, or specifically lack of the right management automation. Homegrown tools and manual troubleshooting aren't enough really anymore, as these findings have hopefully proven. Well, that's it for the top 10. These are the 10 items that first caught my eye as I first looked over the results of this survey, and hopefully they were of interest to you as well. But just to wrap up, I'd like to summarize some of the factors, sort of key takeaways here. It appears that less than 40% of the companies surveyed here have and use APM tools. And of course, in a related note, the number of problem notification calls IT is still receiving from users actually reinforces the actual impact of this number. IT specialists on the front lines tell us that 60% of the time, users notify them of application-related problems. We've also seen that there may be a disconnect between the levels of service being delivered and the perceptions of folks in management roles. I believe that management already has some inkling of this, since they're the ones who appear to be primarily driving interest in operational analytics. In terms of public cloud, its use for production services appears to have hit early mainstream. Clearly, this delivery medium is already beginning to shape the way applications and transactions are being built, since, as we also saw, about 40% of companies are delivering hybrid cloud applications. Finally, regardless of whether applications are delivered via cloud, via on-premise, or a mix of the two, the same old problems seem to remain. High cost, intermittent problems, and slow performance just seem to linger on. And as on-premise and cloud application components increasingly interact, the challenges will likely continue to intensify. Today, I see application management tools as being more relevant than ever before, and I really believe that 2014 is the year that these tools are going to start to accelerate in terms of market adoption. Cloud-ready APM tools will continue to deliver value as production applications increasingly span on-premise and cloud platforms. So my presentation actually took up quite a bit of the time for our 35-minute webinar, but Raleigh, I wondered if there are any questions that came in that maybe I could answer in this short remaining time frame.
Yes, Julie, there is. I think we have time for one or two, but before we jump into that, I did want to quickly mention to the audience that Julie's, I think you said it was 130 pages, Julie, for your report.
Yeah, there's a ton of data.
That report will be available later this week, and I'll send you all an email with the link if you're interested in that. You'll also be receiving a follow-up email from EMA tomorrow that will include the on-demand webinar. So Julie, let's just go ahead and jump right into the questions. The first one is, have you seen a resistance to SaaS-based APM solutions?
I have not, actually. You know, I'm seeing, I'll tell you what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of interest in APM solutions in general. And I've also seen a lot of interest in making APM consumption as easy as possible. So that being said, you know, there are a lot of products in the market that run on-premise that vendors have put a lot of time and effort into sort of streamlining to the point where they are much easier to install and implement and manage than they were several years ago. That being said, I'm also seeing some excellent SaaS-based products out there. And these products are also seeing quite a bit of growth year over year. So, you know, I have to say, looking at the growth of these products, that, you know, there is definitely not resistance. It's probably the contrary. I think companies are very interested in consuming these kinds of services.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Let's take one final question. You've referred to a disconnect between management and line staff in terms of the perceptions of service levels being delivered and management products in use. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I'm actually glad somebody mentioned that, because I'm not trying to, you know, knock anybody. I'm not trying to knock management here. The reality is that both management and IT line staff, they have their own duties, and they do, you know, they spend most of their time actually attending to what their top of mind issues are. That being said, I think there's a huge lack of good reporting that IT executives have. And I also think that they're very aware of this. For example, one of the questions I asked that I didn't report on was about big operational data. We're hearing so much about that these days. And one of the things that I found was that in general, you know, the interest in these kinds of products, it was somewhere, if you take, you know, all the respondents as a group, it was somewhere around 25% level of interest. However, if you looked at middle managers in particular, that number goes up to more than 40%, and it's also high for directors and C-level. So I think there's definitely a market for operational analytics. I think the primary customers are going to be mid-level and high-level executives, and I think that's a good thing because I think those products will definitely promote better communication across the different roles in IT.
Thanks, Julie. I know we weren't able to get to all the questions. I will go ahead and send those on to Julie so she can respond. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of their schedule to join us. Look for that email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow if you want to revisit the webinar. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.